distinguished guests, speakers, guests, colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 13th ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking webinar series on adaptive justice responses on trafficking in persons under the new normal. Thank you for joining us. Always exciting to see our ASEAN counterparts and partners in the region and beyond in our webinar series. Today, we have more than 380 registrants. This webinar will present the different support models that can help traffic victims access justice, featuring distinguished international and regional speakers who I will be introducing later. I am Darlene Pajarito, the Justice Systems Director of ASEAN-ACT, calling in from the Philippines. I will be moderating this webinar with Senior Justice Systems Coordinator Chanapat Maridul as my co-moderator. Before we proceed, please let us first listen to the House rules.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. We would like to make this virtual event a pleasing and productive experience. To make this happen, the organizers request all participants to observe the following house rules. You may use a chat box when you want to provide inputs or comments. For documentation purposes, this event will be recorded. If you require special assistance to take part in this event, please notify our event organizers so that we can accommodate to your needs. Please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen to select the language of your choice. Our interpreters are on standby. Lastly, as we are in a virtual environment, we will be kind to one another in case of internet connection issues. We will expect unavoidable technical difficulties. Feel free to join back if you're disconnected. Everyone's patience will be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your attention.
Our speakers will all be presenting in English. To listen to our speakers in your desired language, we have interpretation channel for English, Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Thai, and Vietnamese. And if you want to listen in Lao, please click the Spanish channel for translation. The Zoom recording, including the PowerPoint presentations and other materials, will be made available in our ASEAN-ACT portal. You can see the link to our portal in the chat box. Now, to formally open the webinar and deliver her keynote remarks, we're very honored and to have with us First Secretary Carla Euronek of the Australian Mission to ASEAN. Very delighted to pass the virtual floor to you, Carla.
Thanks, Darlene, for the very warm welcome, and good afternoon from the Australian Mission to ASEAN in Jakarta. Counter-trafficking partners, practitioners, advocates, and other distinguished colleagues from around the ASEAN region and beyond. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the 13th ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking webinar for 2022, which is titled Protection and Beyond, Models that Support Trafficked Victims' Access to Justice. The Australian Government, through the ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, known to most of you as ASEAN-ACT, is proud to be supporting this webinar series to continue discussion of adaptive justice responses to trafficking in persons. The most widely accepted framework to combating trafficking in persons is composed of the 3 Ps: prosecution, prevention, and protection. This framework is also enshrined in both international and regional legal instruments, namely the Palermo Protocol under the UN Convention against Transnational Organised Crime and the ASEAN Convention against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, known as the ACT. This webinar focuses on the protection aspect of the 3 Ps framework and explores what is meant in practice by protecting victims of trafficking. The ACT requires all ASEAN member states to provide care and support to victims of trafficking, including services such as housing, medical, psychosocial support, as well as material assistance and access to information regarding legal rights and entitlements. Identifying a victim of trafficking is a vital step towards alleviating exploitation and offering pathways for trafficked persons to access justice. Frontline responders, such as social workers, immigration officials, police, and NGOs, play a critical role during the victim identification stage. Not only do they provide immediate support, but they also help victims to understand and exercise their rights. They also help make referrals to legal clinics and other service providers who can help victims to seek remedies to address their grievances. The ASEAN region has one of the strongest legal frameworks to protect victims of trafficking. However, we know that victims of trafficking still struggle to access the legal and other services they need to recover and move forward from the traumatic experience of being trafficked. The frameworks ASEAN member states have in place for identifying and protecting victims of trafficking have become even more critical over the past 18 months, with new patterns of trafficking and exploitation emerging in the region, involving a wider range of victims from within and beyond the ASEAN region. To explore some of the good practices in victim protection and discuss some of the ongoing challenges, ASEAN-ACT has brought together a panel of experts with extensive knowledge and experience in providing effective and innovative responses to support victims of trafficking. Today, we are very honoured to have Ms. Vida Verzosa, Chargé d'Affaires, Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syrian Arab Republic, who will share the Philippines' experience in repatriating and protecting Filipino migrant workers who fell prey to traffickers in Syria. Ms. Sandeep Dillon, Human Rights Legal Practice Manager from Anti-Slavery Australia, who will share the organisation's experience providing a nationwide service that assists victims of modern slavery, trafficking and forced marriage, regardless of their visa or migration status. Ms. Kong Seng Bien Ban Ya, Program Coordinator for the Protection and Empowerment of Women and Children from ASEAN-ACT's partner, Village Focus International, who are the lead non-government organisation in our PDR providing protection and support to victims of trafficking. With the collective knowledge this expert panel will bring today, I'm confident that this webinar will generate important learnings for us all as counter-trafficking actors focus on improving responses to trafficking and protecting the human rights of victims. On behalf of the Australian Government, thank you for your strong interest and participation. We look forward to this important discussion, which has real and tangible implications for victims of trafficking and their protection across the ASEAN region and beyond. Thank you again.
David, you're still muted. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. Thank you again, Carla, for the very warm opening. Indeed, we are all excited to listen to our experts talk about the innovative responses on victim protection and assistance, and of course, the support models that can help bridge the gap between the justice systems and the needs of the victim. So thank you. The messages were very inspiring and have certainly set the tone for today's discussion. So at this point, may I request our esteemed panelists to join us and open your camera, put on your camera, please. So we'll have a group photo. Can we request everyone, all right? Eve will prompt us. Can we request everyone to put their camera on? And Eve, please let us know if we're good. All right. We can do a wave as well, please. Can we request everyone to do the wave?
3, 2, 1. Smile.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eve. And thank you for the big smiles. All right. Please, again, indulge me a bit of your time to share some feedback from our last webinar held last October 7. The topic was on evidence presentation. Can alternative modes of presenting victim testimonies increase chances of conviction? So from the slides, you can see that 96% of our online audience said that the topic was very relevant to their work and that they have learned something new. 97% found the speakers to be knowledgeable, and 95% believe that the webinar was very useful. So from the survey feedback, these numbers have actually increased from our previous webinars. So it's a very positive feedback. And I'd like to also quote some of the motivating comments that we received from the survey feedback. Let me read. I can apply my learnings to the online sexual exploitation of children casework that I'm handling and will advocate for the presentation of victim independence evidence to prevent re-traumatization of child victims. And we also had another comment from a law enforcer, and he said, as the primary law enforcement office in combating trafficking in persons, we will adopt the video in-depth interview of all our child witnesses and victims for the subsequent presentation in court trials. So thank you to the participants who've shared their feedbacks. We always value your comments to help us improve our work and serve you better. So please, again, we will be requesting the same to complete the feedback survey at the end of this webinar. The link is in the chat box. We will also send you a certificate of attendance upon the completion of the survey. So, all right, so it's there. Just take your time. You can complete it at the end of the webinar. So in this webinar, let me discuss a bit of the objectives of this webinar. There will be a discussion on different models of support that can help traffic victims access justice at initial or critical points of contact. And for this, we have speakers to talk about the initial critical points of contact at destination country, the legal clinics, and in the community. Our speakers will also share the good practices in providing individualized support and assistance and how these have impact on the victims. But before we hear from our speakers, we would like to get their thoughts first about our topic today. May we kindly request you to answer 3 poll questions. It will be posted on your screen. No identification will be asked when you are answering the polls. Just 3 clicks and you're done. The results generated from these poll questions will be used solely for this webinar. All right, for purposes of translation, I will read the poll questions. So for poll question number 1, what do you think hinders the provision of adequate legal assistance to traffic victims? First, lack of awareness, knowledge, or capacity. Second, lack of coordination. Third, lack of tools or on referral system. Or fourth, all of the above. Our second question, if there were to be an ASEAN-wide protection and support mechanism for traffic victims, what is the most important factor in establishing this mechanism? First choice, frontline officers are able to identify and refer victims to service providers. Second, available and accessible services for traffic victims. Third, common understanding of victim-centered approaches and individualized needs assessment. And fourth, harmonization of legal frameworks for traffic victims protection. So please click your preferred answer from among the choices. And our third question, in your experience, which action should be prioritized to ensure access to justice for traffic victims across the ASEAN region? First, develop common victim identification guidelines among ASEAN member states. Second, strengthen internal collaboration among victim assistance agencies. And third, increase capacity of relevant authorities. So keep on clicking and answering the polls. We will still leave that there. We will close it maybe after 30 minutes. We will present the poll results after our esteemed panelists have finished all their presentations. All right, so thank you so much. Let me introduce our first speaker. Sandeep Dillon, she is a human rights legal practice manager of Anti-Slavery Australia. Sandeep carries oversight of the legal practice at the Anti-Slavery Australia and represents women, men, and children who are currently experiencing or have survived modern slavery. She advises clients in relation to a range of issues, including complex immigration matters, access to compensation, the criminal justice process, and other avenues for remediation. She is particularly aware of the barriers individuals face in accessing support and advocates for increased awareness about modern slavery among the community so that survivors are able to better access support and protection. Sandeep also provides holistic legal support to individuals at risk of or experiencing forced marriage through My Blue Sky. Prior to joining Anti-Slavery Australia, Sandeep worked as a lawyer for the Australian government departments and tribunals in various roles and has volunteered at a range of community legal centers and nonprofit organizations. So Sandeep, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Darlene, for that kind introduction. I'm hoping to speak with you all today to share some of our reflections from our practical experience of working with victim survivors at Anti-Slavery Australia within the Australian context. So before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking on, and also to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I think it's particularly important to make this acknowledgement in the context of our discussions today, particularly given Australia's own history of slavery and exploitation through colonisation. So to start with, Anti-Slavery Australia is a not-for-profit centre within the University of Technology, Sydney. We have three main areas of work, which you can see on one of those slides there. So firstly, we run a specialist legal service that provides pro bono legal advice and assistance to victims of modern slavery and trafficking. This includes anyone that has been trafficked, enslaved, exploited, or forced into marriage as defined by Australian laws. Our commitment to working with and supporting survivors really is our core purpose. Although we're based in Sydney, we do have a national reach and we support victim survivors all across the country. We also run My Blue Sky, which is Australia's national forced marriage service dedicated to providing support specifically for individuals at risk of or experiencing forced marriage. We undertake research and advocacy work, which is informed by the lived experiences of the people that we work with. And this includes identifying trends in the field, key issues for government, and also the effect of modern slavery on the broader Australian community. Lastly, we also undertake awareness raising, education, training, and advisory work to the community, frontline workers, government, and also a range of agencies. I'm going to speak more about the legal practice now. And as I've touched upon, our service is Australia-wide and importantly, all of our services and ongoing representation are completely free and confidential. Our legal practice has been operating for around 18 years and has supported hundreds of clients with a range of issues. And if I could kindly ask if we could go to slide 5, that would be wonderful. Our client profile at Anti-Slavery Australia has always reflected the experiences of some of the most vulnerable groups in the Australian community. And we currently represent over 300 individuals that have experienced trafficking or slavery in Australia. As awareness about modern slavery grows, our caseload also increases. At its heart, our work is really about supporting and empowering victim survivors, preventing future harm, and also increasing access to justice. We take a strength-based approach and we see our role as providing victim survivors with the information they need and access to any legal remedies available to be able to regain control and also make decisions about their future moving forward. Through our free legal practice, we develop continued relationships with victim survivors that extend well beyond the immediate legal challenges that they're facing. And we provide ongoing representation as well as wraparound referrals. The lived experience of survivors really shapes our legal practice, and we reiterate that the human rights of victim survivors should be at the centre of any measures that are taken to address these serious abuses. We offer assistance in relation to a range of issues, which you can see here on the slide. And this includes the laws in Australia around trafficking and slavery and people's rights and options, including engaging with the criminal justice process. We also see an intersection between trafficking and migration, and we recognise that individuals on temporary visas or who are unlawful face an increased vulnerability to these offences. So providing complex migration assistance is a large part of our work. We assist individuals to reunite with their families, for example, by applying for family members from overseas to come to Australia and support our clients. We also assist individuals to apply for violence restraining orders against perpetrators of violence and harm. In terms of civil law, we assist people to apply for victims' compensation under state schemes, as well as helping individuals to obtain legal and identity documents, which are often taken from them during experiences of modern slavery. Repatriation is also a core part of our work, and at times we're contacted by individuals who have been trafficked overseas, and in those cases we would work with government to try and repatriate them. Really importantly as well, we're often making referrals to other services, and in doing that we recognise that individuals require other support to be in a position to be able to receive legal advice and to engage with any criminal justice process. So we're often making referrals for psychosocial support, such as counselling or mental health support, as well as accommodation. I might just skip to the next slide, please. As you can see from the diagram on this slide, individuals come to our attention through a range of sources. Clients are referred to us by organisations such as the Australian Federal Police, the Red Cross, and other community organisations who have identified a possible victim. We also run a telephone hotline, which we staff during business hours, where individuals or other concerned parties are able to contact us directly and speak with a lawyer. Generally, the first thing we do when someone contacts us is to work out a way to speak safely with that person. So that might be over text, over email, or by arranging a specific safe time to talk on the phone or in person. And we're really flexible in the way that we speak with people, recognising that they're often in precarious situations. The first time we speak with someone, we would explain our role and the assistance that we can provide, and also gather some background information about that person's situation, and really importantly, about what their desired outcomes are. And we can then work with them to identify any legal remedies that are available to help them achieve their desired goals. If we think that someone is at risk of or has experienced trafficking, we'll talk to them about referring their matter to a specific team within the Australian Federal Police that's responsible for investigating human trafficking. We can only refer a matter with the informed consent of an individual, and often it will take a number of conversations before a person is comfortable speaking to the authorities, if at all. By providing individuals with advice and information, they're able to make informed decisions and better engage in any criminal justice process. If a person consents to a referral to the Australian Federal Police and engages in a criminal investigation, they will receive intensive support through a program called the Support for Trafficked People program, which is administered by the Australian Red Cross. Having said that, we recognise that many individuals do not want to or are unable to engage with the authorities for many reasons, and in those circumstances, we would continue to work with them, and our support is not contingent on any engagement with the government or with the authorities. Recognising the complexity of trafficking and slavery and the need for holistic support, we're often providing assistance in relation to a range of legal issues at the same time, and we also provide ongoing representation for a number of years. We often refer to trafficking and slavery as clandestine crimes which occur behind closed doors, and this makes it really difficult for us to estimate the number of people that are living in slavery or slavery-like conditions, and this is illustrated by the statistics on the slide here. So you can see that in Australia, only about 1 in 5 victims of slavery are identified. And this demonstrates that despite having the legal and procedural frameworks in place, victim survivors still face barriers in seeking assistance. This is due to a range of reasons, including lack of information or knowledge about their rights and the support available, compounded with an inability to reach out due to their particular circumstances. For this reason, we believe it's incredibly important for everyone to be aware of modern slavery and to continue raising awareness and equipping frontline service providers with the skills to be able to recognise indicators for trafficking and to make the appropriate referrals for advice and support. Through our work as well, we have observed that immigration outcomes, support services and financial assistance for victim survivors are connected to cooperation with the criminal justice system. In the Australian context, the Australian Federal Police is the only agency authorised to refer a person to the specific support program that I mentioned earlier. We think it's incredibly important to recognise that survivors of trafficking and slavery may be fearful of meeting with law enforcement officials early on in any identification process, which has the effect of restricting their willingness and ability to engage with the authorities. We believe that the existing referral process in Australia that requires referral by the police is unduly narrow, and in reality, it has the effect that some victim survivors may remain unidentified and ineligible for support. And for this reason, we do believe it's really necessary to broaden the pool of agencies permitted to make referrals for support, including key civil society organisations. The last point that I would like to touch upon briefly, which we believe is essential to ensuring support and justice, is compensation. Victim survivors have a right to redress and specific remedies for the harm that they've suffered, and we believe that governments should introduce comprehensive national compensation schemes to recognise the serious psychological trauma suffered by survivors of trafficking and slavery, and to ensure that they have access to compensation to assist them in rebuilding their lives. And this is really a vocal point of advocacy for us at Anti-Slavery Australia. I'm very conscious of time, and I would just like to conclude by reiterating again the importance of access to justice for victim survivors through adequate victim-centred support and legal remedies that promote their rehabilitation, prevent re-trafficking, and also enable individuals to move forward and to regain control over their lives.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for a very comprehensive presentation. And of course, highlighting the value of getting the informed consent of the victims or individuals to engage in the justice process, as well as the importance of access to justice through adequate support, legal remedies, and as you've mentioned, compensation as important ingredients to victims' empowerment and recovery. So thank you again, Sandeep. So now let us proceed to hear or listen to our second distinguished speaker, Vida Soraya Versosa. She is the youngest female charge d'affaires of the Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syrian Arab Republic. She aims to secure access to justice for trafficked survivors by applying the gender equality, disability, and social inclusion principles in the embassy as part of her Australia Awards re-entry plan. So prior to Syria, she was the Assistant Director of the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of Treaties and Legal Affairs Litigation Division, after serving as a private prosecutor for the International Justice Mission Philippines. Recently, Charge d'Affaires Vida was also the only Filipina in the Directed Studies program of the Hague Academy for International Law. In 2018, the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, conferred upon her the Outstanding Alumni of the Year Award for Women and Children's Rights Advocacy. She obtained her Juris Doctor degree from the Ateneo Law School, where she joined the Ateneo Human Rights Center as a volunteer. You have the floor, Sidi Vida.
Thank you so much, Prosec Darlene, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So, merhaba, assalamu alaikum from Damascus, Syria. So I'd also like to, before I begin, shout out to all those watching from DFA, DOJ IACT, POEA, Philippine National Police, to our friends from Bataan, Tacloban, Navotas, Mandaluyong, Angeles, Abra, Dipolog, Cebu, and many more. And of course, all the ASEAN member countries who are here. So I'd like to begin first by presenting a short video about the experience of one of our trafficking survivors. Thank you very much. Let me begin with the story of Lara. Lara is a 43-year-old Filipina high school graduate who was lured by the promises of a good job abroad. However, when she was transported using a tourist visa by her recruiter through Malaysia and finally landing at Syria, her nightmare began.
Yung ginawang pananakit sa akin, 7 na taon po akong sa amo ko na walang kalaban-laban na sinasaktan. Tapos 7 taon po akong walang komunikasyon sa pamilya ko. 7 taon din po akong hindi nakapagpadala ng para po sa mga anak ko. Kaya alam po ng pamilya ko na wala na po, patay na po ako.
Lara was treated like an animal. She was chained, she was beaten, she was imprisoned for 7 years inside the toilet. Her employer would punch her so strong that eventually her teeth would be knocked out. She would be gagged and tied. They would shout at her and maltreat her physically, emotionally, psychologically. Until one day she escaped. A Syrian family took pity on her and brought her to the Philippine Embassy shelter. And that is where I met her. That is where I decided that I wanted to help her through this Access to Justice and Legal Empowerment Program under my Reentry Action Plan. Hi, my name is Vida Soraya Verzosa from the Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syria. I'm here to talk about my gender equality, disability, and social inclusion mainstreaming course. My Reentry Action Plan for this particular project talks about how we can do legal empowerment and access to justice approaches that are gender sensitive, victim friendly, and trauma informed for human trafficking victims. I arrived here in Damascus, Syria on the 20th of December 2020. The Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syria works with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic to prosecute cases of human trafficking and illegal recruitment against the girls who are in the Philippine Embassy shelter. The story of Lara is just one out of the hundreds of other distressed overseas Filipino workers who are right now in shelters in our Philippine embassies and consulates abroad. And thus, the REAP was designed to empower Assistance to Nationals officers by teaching them how to prepare judicial affidavits with a JEDC lens for filing in both Philippine courts and Syrian courts and hold perpetrators of violence accountable for their crimes. As a result of my Reentry Action Plan, all the girls who were repatriated to the Philippines were interviewed and their judicial affidavits were prepared. These were then endorsed to the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, and these cases were filed in the regional trial courts so that we will be sure that the perpetrators of illegal recruitment and human trafficking will be made accountable for their crimes. According to our partners from the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, this is an innovation since it is the first time that the Philippine Embassy has been involved in the preparation of evidence and case buildup in terms of being equipped even at the level of the ATN officers. This is also a very good interagency approach because we were able to collaborate and ensure that even prior to arrival to the Philippines, the girls would already be given free legal advice and they would be assisted in the prosecution side of our anti-trafficking strategy.
Maraming salamat po. Talaga salamat po sa Panginoon na mabibigyan ng katarungan yung mga nangyari sa akin sa tulong po ng Philippine Embassy.
Using the JEDC mainstreaming approach, we want to show women like Lara and other distressed overseas Filipino workers like her that justice is possible even for the poorest of the poor. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for that video. And I'd also like to share that it's not just the tragic side of trafficking that we want to share, but also how we were able to conclude that story by providing access to justice to all the survivors from Syria. So the next one is a video from TFC News. For some who are here, especially those from the DOJ, probably you've seen this video before, but I'd like to just give the English translation as well. So may I ask if this video can be played? Thank you. Okay, so last June 24, 2021, 22 victims of trafficking in persons in Syria have been repatriated to the Philippines under the Philippine government's repatriation program. That's why, for the first time in the history of the embassy, the Filipino Workers Resource Center, or the FWRC in Syria, has been completely empty. This FWRC is a temporary residence or shelter for citizens who have problems with their work status in the country. And this is part of the intensified campaign of the Philippine Embassy in Syria against human trafficking when I was appointed here back in 2020. So here you will also see what the embassy shelter looks like. It's an old building in Damascus, Syria. And here are some of our meetings where we take a one-country team approach. Everyone has the opportunity to participate in the anti-trafficking program because of this action plan that we designed in accordance with the United Nations Strategic Development Goals of providing access to justice, as well as the Department of Foreign Affairs policy on protecting Filipino nationals. So this is the shelter before it was renovated. Just after they left, some of them, you can see, were living in terrible conditions. But after long negotiations and filing of cases against illegal recruiters and human traffickers, the last group of wards was able to return home. And because of this, even our honorary Philippine Consulate General in Aleppo was happy with the historic repatriation of all the wards from the shelter. Here also is a message where I'm trying to communicate to the citizens about the situation in Syria, that it started out that we had 56 wards in the shelter, but now our shelter has been emptied. All those who are still in the shelter right now are just the new runaways who are there. Some of the wards were there for 3 years, and then when I assumed, I requested for a presidential pardon and annulment of the cases of the Filipinos, so they were granted exit visas by the Syrian government in a more expedited process. So our Consul General in Aleppo is a Syrian, but was also awarded Filipino citizenship because of his assistance to the Philippine government. So he was explaining that he's grateful to the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Chodoro Locsin, as well as those who were very happy that for the first time in the history of the embassy in Syria, the shelter was emptied, that all of the wards that we had who were stuck there for a long time were able to come home because of the interagency approach of coordinating with the ASEAN-ACT, especially with the POEA lawyers who are assisting us. Here you will also see that the last group of the repatriates during this year were unable to contain their joy and excitement. So you can see that they're very, very happy that they were finally able to come home. We provided a transportation for them, and we were able to prepare the evidence packets as well. So that's the orange folder that you will see. The embassy also continues to help repatriates to pursue and prosecute their illegal recruiters in the Philippines, Malaysia, Dubai, and even in Syria. And the embassy partners with the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, or POEA, subsumed under the DMW right now to make sure that we will be able to help them. So here, it's a reminder to everyone that until now, there is still a deployment ban in Syria. And if someone wants to work and travel abroad, to please ensure that people go through the right agencies like POEA, and the recruitment agency has a license that will really show that there's a job order. So let us not be deceived by human traffickers and illegal recruiters who will promise that we can travel, even if it's on a mere tourist visa. Let's not be deceived. And we should always be conscious that we would go through the legal method. So this report was done by Maxi Santiago from TFC News in Kuwait, handling Europe and the Middle East. So this story ends on a happy ending because of the way that they were able to come home, but it's just a new season for them. So when they reached the Philippines, we were able to provide legal assistance to them by making sure that the judicial affidavits that were prepared, even here in Syria, through what the ASEAN nicknamed as the Syria model, is the legal basis for them to get their traffickers arrested. So those from Zamboanga, you know that we were able to catch the #1 most influential trafficker, and we were able to file cases against her and her cohorts. So we continue to fight for justice for these women, not just here in Syria, but also even when they're back in the Philippines, and making sure that they are continually assisted in the models of protection, prosecution, and prevention of trafficking in persons. So thank you very much to everyone for listening. And indeed, we are stronger when we work together. We thank ASEAN-ACT for this opportunity to share about the Syria model. And I hope that it's not just in Syria, but all the other embassies and consulates would somehow consider that this can be a new approach to innovate and strengthen our partnerships with everyone. Thank you very much. Magandang hapon po.
Thank you so much, CDA Vida, for sharing with us those powerful video presentation. Heartbreaking as well, but you mentioned that it ended on a good or positive note. But still heartbreaking to see how migrant workers are being abused overseas and are always at risk of being trafficked or re-trafficked. So we do hope that this good practice can be replicated in other posts or countries. The resiliency of Lara amidst the horrible experiences that she had to go through, and how the justice system met her needs and gave her some sense of justice is a manifestation of the positive impact of the innovative interagency judicial response that you have just shared, and in providing individualized support and assistance to the victim. So thank you again also for pursuing the pardon, which is really very important, as we all know that traffic victims should not be penalized for crimes that they committed in relation to being trafficked. So thank you again, CDA Vida. So on to our last, but certainly not the least presenter is Ms. Kong Seng Piangpanya. She works at the Village Focus International in Lao PDR as a full-time program coordinator on the protection and empowerment of women and children against human trafficking and assist Lao returned migrants. She has 18 years of experience working on the issue on trafficking in person, and her work include being a trainer on human trafficking, labor migration, and other related issues such as child sexual exploitation, domestic violence. She also coordinates with local partners, government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector to build a local network that can respond quickly to victims of trafficking, policy and advocacy, both at the regional and national level. She is also involved in cross-border collaboration between Laos and neighboring countries to facilitate discussion on migration and trafficking. She oversees 2 education and rehabilitation centers or shelters, providing direct assistance to victims of human trafficking in Laos. So, Ms. Gonseng, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for your introductions, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased today to present and share what experience of Village Focus International have been doing, and maybe sharing about the access to justice, what we doing. So thanks for the ASEAN-ACT and Australian government to give me a chance to share that. So first of all, would like to brief about Village Focus International. We are the NGO working in Laos, and we are involved in the human trafficking since 2003. And at that time, we are focusing on the community actions against trafficking, and I was the project manager for that project. So we, from that time up to now, we expand our work, not only focusing on the community actions against trafficking. We work on the prevention of the human trafficking, raising awareness in the community. We are running the shelter, protection and services to the trafficking victim, and of course, doing a little bit on the legal advocacy. So we want to work broaden beyond just in the community, but we also are networking with the other CSO working in Laos, and also the CSO working in the neighboring country, especially in Thailand, in order to provide assistance to the victim of human trafficking. So what I'm going to share today is about, of course, our work that provide assistance to the Lao victim of human trafficking. Next slide, please. We, of course, that we working at starting at the beginning before the victim. Before we find the victim to be trafficked, we working in the community awareness raising with the family, community, among the youth as well. That's also to promote about our services so that the family and the community know us that Village Focus International, so I provide the services. It's really, really important for the community to know that where the services are. And then this is a very important and successful work. So we receive the report from the community or the family or the potential victim themselves asking us for assistance. And then we will have a social worker contact to the family, getting the information, report to the authority or the police, both in Laos and also the destination country for assist the victim of human trafficking. It's really important, not only the access to justice is also important, but if you don't know where the victim are, that cannot help the victim to access to the justice. This is what we try to our best to working in the community so that they know the service, where is the service and asking for the assistance. Once we know the information, we helping the rescuing process by refer on the information to the police. We connect with the CSO in Thailand, as I just mentioned earlier. It's really important so that they know that there are the trafficking victim who need help, where they are, and how to rescuing. And we also support for the repatriation once they return to the country. We repatriate them back to the community. Next slide, please. So we have a shelter services. So of course, we provide a safe accommodation. And most of the victims that we found, they have mental and physical health problem. So that our important work is also to provide them the mental health care and physical health care. And also the counseling, we use the counselor to provide regular counseling in order to empowering them. Some of the photo here, you see that what we are working with the victim of human trafficking to helping them to recover and empowering. And then we use several types of activity, particularly the art therapy and other life skills in order to empower them. So in order to bring them to justice, it's really important to empowering them and enable them to speak out what's happening to them when they are trafficked. That's a very key important for us to empower the trafficking victim. Next slide, please. Not only the safe shelter that we provided for the rehabilitation, we keep them active with the vocational training and education, whatever they need and what they like. So individual need, each victim, they have the need not the same. They need individual important life that they want to do, so that we very important to have the individual need plan and then providing them as a progress so far. Next slide, please. Yes, of course, once we can empowering them, they enable to speak out. Many victims of human trafficking cannot access to justice without the assistance of the services. So once we helping them to access the justice, when we found many victims of human trafficking, they are not identified as the victim. So we helping them to contact with the police, rescue them, and then victim of human trafficking to be identified as the victim. That's the first step. And next, we will helping them to proceed on the court, helping them finding the lawyer and empowering to speak during the court proceeding. So it's really important, again, I would say that once the justice arrives and the court proceeding is take long time, The problem is that once the course finished, the implementation of the court result have not yet been done as the rights of the trafficking victim should receive. For example, they have the serious injury, they have mental health, they involved in the long process of the court proceeding, taking about 5 to 8 years. So many cases that involved in the court proceeding, taking long time, so helping them and waiting for what the compensation that we receive. At the end, once the course ends, but the result of the court haven't yet been implemented because of many reasons. And then the victim cannot receive the compensate as they should be. This is one of still the challenges that we need to think about after the court proceeding ended, how the compensate should get back to the victim. We found many cases that we assist. We working very hard, trying to empower the victim, and then they are able to stand in and they can speak in the court, and they family also helping them, supporting them. But then at the end, the compensation haven't yet paid as they should have. Of course, many traffickers involved, they have power and not yet to be in jail, and the compensate haven't yet repaid to the victim of human trafficking. So I think that's according to our experiences, access to justice is really important. And the end of the court proceeding, we have to ensure that the victim of human trafficking receive the compensation as they should be. So during the court proceeding, we not only support the victim of human trafficking, but we also support for their family. Many times, many victims, they were rescued and end up to be trafficked in the destination country. But during the court proceeding, they also need the family to go and be the witness in the destination country. But because of they are very poor family, they cannot travel, they cannot have passport. So we provide assistance to the family, helping them to make the passport, and also many times we also support for the transportation and ensuring that they have safe transport, arrive at the destination country. So by the end of my presentation, I would say that the really important is also to support the family, also support the victim of human trafficking, and access to justice is a key important that first of all, the victim have to know where they ask for help. Secondly, the police or the authority have to know what they should do, and then networking with also CSO and other service provider. So many sectors are really important to support the victim of human trafficking access to justice. And at the end of the court, we have to also how to help the victim receive the compensation as they should have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Konseng, for that excellent presentation. And I like that you've mentioned that one of the services that you provide is life skills in helping victims learn about it. And in addition, of course, to providing them basic support services. And of course, as mentioned by other speakers, the value of supporting the family as well and providing or assisting them in getting the compensation. So, but just to emphasize on the life skill, I think, yeah, that's very important. Everyone do need life skills, especially the ability to handle how they feel about themselves, their emotional balance, their physical health, their independence, and even their financial independent. So thank you again, Ms. Kong Seng. So now let us, but before going back to the poll questions, I would just like to remind everyone, if you have questions, I saw one earlier who was raising his hand. Sir Jonathan, if you can kindly put in the Q&A box your question, we will appreciate that very much. And so now let us proceed to looking at the results of the poll questions. Okay. All right. Do we see, can we put up the poll results? There you go. So for question number 1, what do you think hinders the provision of adequate legal assistance to victims of trafficking? We see that 78% said that all of these choices, lack of awareness, knowledge and capacity, lack of coordination, lack of tools on referral mechanism should all be are the factors that hinders the provision of adequate legal assistance. But 18% said that it is lack of awareness, knowledge, or capacity, while only 4% said that it's lack of coordination, and just 1% on lack of tools on referral mechanism. So for this, I would like to request Sandeep, if you can give us your reaction, comments on this, just a 2-minute response.
Sure. Thank you, Darlene. I think this is a really important question, and my answer would also be all of the above. I think trafficking and slavery, like we've all touched upon today, they're crimes that often occur behind closed doors. And it's really important to increase awareness around the indicators for trafficking and slavery and the support that's available. And that's among the community generally. So at Anti-Slavery Australia, we do receive contact from members of the community who have seen something concerning and contacted us or the authorities, and victims have been identified through general members of the community. But I also think that we need to continue capacity building within frontline service providers, because they're often the first point of contact and the people that are coming into contact people on a daily basis, including potential victim survivors. And again, increased coordination between government and civil society is also key, because we have seen what we can achieve when we're all collaborating together. And I think particularly when assisting victim survivors to approach the authorities or to engage with government and the criminal justice process, that collaboration and partnership is incredibly important. And again, just also ensuring that support is available to people, regardless of their capacity to participate in any criminal justice process, is really essential.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sandeep. I also agree with you and the participants who have participated in the poll questions, that it has to be all of the above. All of these challenges must be addressed. I just like to also inform everyone that 56% of our participants joined the poll questions, or joined in answering the poll questions. So it's a good number are saying yes, it's all of the above. So now let's proceed to the second question. If there were to be an ASEAN-wide protection and support mechanism for trafficked victims, what is the most important factor in establishing this mechanism? So we have common understanding of victim-centered approaches and individualized needs assessment as the most important factor for our participants, which because it garnered around 32%, followed by 25% of our participants said that frontline officials are able to identify and refer victims to service providers as also an important factor. And then 22% said harmonization of legal frameworks for tipped victim protection, said that it's important, and only 21% said available and accessible services for tipped victims is also an important factor. So may I call on Ms. Kong Seng to provide your reaction to this poll results, please.
Thanks, Darlene. I would say that these are very, very key important. And part of my presentation is also mentioned about the frontline officer, that they are able to identify and refer to the services provider. I would not say that which one is the best, but I would say that every point it's really important. So the frontline officer is really key. Also, they have to be able to identify and refer to the services, but it's also very important for them to understand and apply the victim-centered approach and individual need assessment into one they identify, because many authorities that we used to work with, when they identify and interview the victim of human trafficking, they are not really looking at what's the 3 key components or the 2 key definition of the human trafficking, and they're still using the voluntary term to be used into the identify, so that many victims of human trafficking were not identified. So I think that it's really important to the frontline officer to understand the center approach and individual need assessment and apply to that. And of course, that harmonize the legal framework to the chief protection is also really the key important, because identification of the victim of human trafficking is starting from the action from the national to from the international to the national level. And also the very important, if no available and access to services for the tip victim, that's not meaning that the victim will receive the service. So the available access to service for tip victim, it's also the very key factor, and also should be increasing available and access to services for the tip victim. Those are 4 are also very the key factor for me. So I cannot also make decision which one it should be the best, but everything it can be combined. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kongseng. I think you've explained it quite well. And I think you're also right, because even the participants, the percentages are not very far from each other, right? But with the 32% standing out, no, among the others, but the rest, they're just very few percentage away from each other. So I guess these are all just as important. But of course, very important on the approach that we use, which should be victim-centered approach. So again, thank you, Ms. Kongseng. Now on to our last question. In your experience, which action should be prioritized to ensure access to justice for traffic victims across the ASEAN region? So we have 54% that said that strengthening internal collaboration among victims assistance agency is or should be prioritized, followed by 25% who said that develop common victim identification guidelines among ASEAN member states should also be prioritized, and with 21% saying increased capacity of relevant authorities. So for this poll question, may I call on CDA Vida to give her response?
Thank you so much, Darlene, and thank you to those who responded to the poll. So I agree, internal collaboration among victim assistance agencies is very important. And that's the highlight of the Syria model, because the way that we've coordinated internally is through even informal means like a Facebook Messenger chat group. So can you imagine that even at that level, aside from our coordination meetings with the different law enforcement agencies, even with the POEA, the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Immigration, and even the local law enforcement authorities, you're able to refer cases of those who need to be interviewed for the preparation of the judicial affidavits. And it's also the first time that the evidence packets were prepared even while here in the Philippine Embassy shelter. So when they arrive in the Philippines, it's ready for filing before the Office of the Prosecutor, and eventually it will ripen into an actual criminal case before the proper regional trial court. So this would not be possible if it weren't for the collaboration And of course, for the identification guidelines, the uniqueness of being in a foreign country makes this transnational crime quite challenging, since you need to overcome the barriers of the indigenous language and the Arabic language of the employers, as well as those who have very low education, the very vulnerable survivors we have that can't speak English, which is the language of Philippine law. So it's something that we really need to work on to make sure that under Syrian law and Philippine law, the commonality would be the basis under the Palermo Protocol. So we were able to get the victim identification guidelines through the very law of the Syrian Arab Republic, coinciding with Philippine law. And finally, in terms of the capacity of relevant authorities, so that's why I thank the Australian government for the JEDC program, because we view it not just from the human trafficking approach, but also understanding persons with disability, persons who are socially excluded, especially we have a lot of people from indigenous groups who are trafficked to Syria. And in terms of equipping the authorities here, because not all embassy staff are lawyers, and that's why we need legal empowerment programs to train them, to equip them, and increase their capacity to handle these different cases and ensure that it's not just functioning business as usual, but thinking of ways to really make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable for their crimes, not just in Syria, but also in the Philippines and in the entire anti-trafficking spectrum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, CDA Vida. And I also agree with you that internal cooperation or collaboration is very important, because that would pave the way for international legal cooperation as well, whether that would be formal or informal. So thank you for sharing that. And also, of course, the other two are just as important and must be also prioritized. So thank you again for all your sharing, and to our participants for participating in this poll questions. Very insightful comments from everyone. So now let us proceed to listening to a short video about Thai victims who were trafficked in the Philippines through the online scamming. So it was a long video, but we took a portion of that, which is very relevant to our discussion in this webinar. So may I call on Eve to please share the 2-minute video.
วันนี้นะครับผมพาเหยื่อจากกระบวนการค้ามนุษย์เนี่ยนะครับซึ่งเล่าให้ฟังอย่างนี้ตัวน้องเองเนี่ยไปวันที่12สิงหานะครับแล้วมีการติดต่อกับกระบวนการนี้ช่วงประมาณวันที่7ที่8สิงหานะครับผ่านทางเฟซบุ๊กคือน้องเขาเซิร์ชเข้าไปว่าหางานอะไรเงี้ยแล้วมันก็เด้งขึ้นมาว่ามีงานทำที่ถูกกฎหมายที่ประเทศฟิลิปปินส์นะครับเขาบอกว่างานนี้มันเป็นงานที่ลักษณะเอาไปทำเหมือนกับบริษัทซื้อขายบิตคอยน์ทั่วไปนะครับถูกกฎหมายน้องก็เดินทางไปวันที่12สิงหาพอไปถึงวันแรกเนี่ยมีการพาเข้าไปสถานที่ทำงานนะครับแล้วก็ยึดพาสปอร์ตวันที่2มาอธิบายว่าการทำงานเนี่ยมันคือลักษณะเหมือนโรแมนต์สแกมเลยนะครับคือให้น้องเขาสร้าง Facebook ปลอมสร้าง IG ปลอมขึ้นมาแล้วก็ให้หาเหยื่อที่เป็นคนไทยนะครับแล้วก็หลอกลวงทีนี้น้องเขาเนี่ยกับเพื่อนเขารวมแล้วเนี่ยทั้งหมด11คนที่ไปเนี่ยก็รู้สึกว่าคือจริงๆมีคนไทยเยอะนะครับที่นั่นประมาณ 30-40 คนนะครับแต่ว่ากลุ่มเขาเนี่ยประมาณ11คนเนี่ยคือไม่อยากทำก็คือคุยกันว่าจะไม่ทำพอไม่ทำเสร็จปุ๊บเนี่ยเลยถูกแยกขังใส่กุญแจมือใส่โซ่ตรวนนะครับแล้วก็บอกว่าให้หาเงินมาถ่ายตัวเนี่ยคนละ100,000 บาทตอนนั้นเนี่ยคือยังไม่ได้ตัวพอยังไม่ได้ตัวปุ๊บเนี่ยก็เริ่มถูกซ้อมบังคับทรมานนะครับถูกเอาไฟฟ้าช็อตนะครับเอาไฟฟ้าช็อตถูกเตะถูกต่อยสุดท้ายแล้วเนี่ยพวกเขาต้องยอมคือครูบอกติดต่อมาทางที่บ้านนี้11คนเนี่ยถ่ายตัวกลับมาได้แค่8คนนะครับเหลืออีก3คนยังถ่ายตัวไม่ได้เมื่อวานน้องมาพบผมนะครับผมก็เลยถามรายละเอียดเสร็จปุ๊บเนี่ยผมเห็นว่าเรื่องนี้มันเป็นเรื่องใหญ่ผมก็เลยติดต่อท่านสสให้ท่านช่วยประสานตรงกับท่านเอกอัครราชทูตไทยประจำประเทศฟิลิปปินส์นะครับเพราะว่าถ้าเราประสานทางเจ้าหน้าที่เนี่ยกลัวว่าจะช้าจะไม่ทันการก็เลยประสานตรงมาที่ท่านเอกอัครราชทูตซึ่งล่าสุดเนี่ยเมื่อคืนนี้ท่านทูตก็แจ้งว่าประสานตำรวจแล้วเดี๋ยวตำรวจกำลังเข้าช่วยเหลือแล้วเมื่อเช้าท่านทูตก็แจ้งกลับมาว่าตอนนี้ทั้ง3คนปลอดภัยแล้วนะครับเอาตัวมาที่สถานทูตเป็นที่เรียบร้อยแล้ววันนี้ผมจึงตัดสินใจพาน้องเขาเนี่ยเข้าแจ้งความจริงๆน้องเขาขอความช่วยเหลือมาโดยตลอดแล้วเมื่อวานนี้ก็มาคุยกันแต่เมื่อวานนี้ยังเอามาแจ้งความไม่ได้เพราะกลัวว่าหากเป็นข่าวแล้วเนี่ยทั้ง3คนที่ฟิลิปปินส์เนี่ยจะเป็นอันตรายแต่พอวันนี้ช่วยเหลือกลับมาได้แล้วเนี่ยวันนี้จึงเอามาแจ้งความเพื่อ จับขบวนการนี้ให้หมดนะครับแล้วก็อีก8คนเนี่ยบางคนไม่กล้าแจ้งความนะครับเพราะว่าก่อนจะกลับมาเนี่ยมันมีการถ่ายคลิปโป๊ของเขาข่มขู่ว่าถ้าเกิดกลับมาแจ้งความเนี่ยจะปล่อยคลิปโป๊มาวันพรุ่งนี้อาจจะต้องพาไปที่กระทรวงยุติธรรมไปยื่นในเรื่องของเงินเยียวยาแล้วก็ทำเรื่องการคุ้มครองพยานด้วยนะครับ
All right, thank you so much. So we would like to request comments or your thoughts on the video. Let me call on now the other way around. May I call on CDA Vida to please share your thoughts on the video.
Thank you very much, Darlene. And the horrific abuse suffered by the survivors is something that is quite appalling and something that embassy officials should also look at. That the human face of diplomacy isn't just state-to-state approaches, but also how do we provide victim assistance and protection through our work in the embassy by liaising with government authorities and doing international cooperation measures, whether through formal instruments like a treaty, or even just making sure that we're able to provide basic needs like their airfare for coming home, or medical assistance, or counseling for them. So that's also within the mandate of an embassy, if there is a shelter available. So I really thank the people in that video who were willing to assist the victims and to ensure that they would also have victim compensation, which is sometimes a big part of the picture that's not always factored in the anti-trafficking models that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CDA Vida. And now may we call on Ms. Kongseng to please share your thoughts on the video.
Thanks, Darlene. This is really horrible, of course, and also this is the trend that's happening not only in some country but also happening in Laos. This case is similar case that we received report for assistance. As I mentioned in my presentation, that the cooperation working with the NGO in another destination is really important. So the similar case is the Lao victim recruited to Philippines and have to and be exploited, and they have to work on what we call calling center, and then they become trafficked. So the similar case is happening on that. I feel very appreciated with the Thai government and also the NGO who are also trying to assist the victim of human trafficking. And I agree with Vida that the embassy is really the key important agency. We also working in order to assist those cases. We also contact to our embassy in Philippines as well, and also the consular here. So they're very the key important role. But the thing is that I think we still need to looking at that how to helping support the embassy and also the consular to enable to helping the victim while they are in the destination country, because it's not an easy for them just to go to the workplace and take out the victim. So they have to cooperate with the that country authority, and they have to have the evidence and go to rescue. So it's not just what we see that they already helping, but it's really the very complicated process before they can be rescued. And then furthermore is how to assist the victim to go to the police and ask for and starting the legal process to punish the trafficker. I think this is very still the challenge, is because the trafficker are not just the black in the black area and have power. So I appreciate that for this video that the police can helping the victim into to claim for access to justice, and still challenge for us if this is what the thing that we need to consider in the future, how to empower the frontline officer empathy and counselor to helping the victim to access justice, not only helping them and safe shelter, but how to claim for the things that they are exploited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kong Seng. Very relevant recommendations there. And I now give the floor to Ms. Sandeep, please.
Thank you. Like many of the others, I completely agree. This video really highlights the importance of cooperation between civil society and government generally in increasing access to justice. And I also think it demonstrates the ways in which government can support victims to return to their home countries if that is what they want. I think it's also a good example of collaboration and partnership, and it's something that we try to do in our own work, such as by referring individuals to the authorities if they wish to engage with the authorities and walking them through that process. But something that strikes me as equally important, and something as well I think we have all touched upon today, is the importance of centering the survivor. And you know, I noticed we didn't hear from survivors in that video, probably for a number of reasons, but I think it's really important.
Sandeep, I think there must be some tech issues. Oh, Sandeep, we lost you for a while.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm not sure where I was up to, but I was speaking about the importance of centering the survivor and listening to them, asking them what it is that they want, and then working with them to achieve those goals. So I think it's so important, like the other speakers have also mentioned, to make sure that the steps we take are taken with the informed consent of the individual, and also that their confidentiality is respected. And we take that approach because we want to ensure that we're empowering individuals rather than acting for them. And in doing so, we're also recognizing that survivors have the right to self-determination, and they have the capacity to regain autonomy and to make informed decisions about their lives moving forward. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Sandeep. I think all of you have already expressed very much the value of using victim-centered approach, human rights-based approach. And of course, I think it's also a good video that also shows what our participants were saying about internal collaboration, which the Thai government did. They collaborated with the Thai embassy in the Philippines, and the rest is history, where the collaboration between Thai and the Philippines had worked from that on, and actually it established a good police-to-police cooperation in that case, and they're still working on that case as we speak. And thank you also, Ms. Kong Seng, for sharing some similar cases in your country. And I think this online scamming has been happening across the region as well, and it's really very interesting how we are helping each other, collaborating with each other to at least protect or provide more protection for the victims in these cases. So again, thank you so much for your insights on the video. So now I've seen many of our participants are raising their hands. Apologies, we won't be able to call you, but we will definitely would like to encourage you to write your questions on the Q&A box. I see Miss Jenny Brillantes raising her hand as well. I hope you can type in your question. And if from the participants, if you have some thoughts also on the poll results, on the videos, and on the presentations of our presenters, if it's not a question but a sharing of what you also think, please feel free to share that in the chat box as well. So now may I give the floor to my co-moderator Pom to facilitate the question and answer from our participants. Pom, please.
Thank you, Attorney Darlene, for your moderation and the start of the discussion. So distinguished speakers and participants, it is my honor to co-moderate this Q&A session for the webinar. I'm Shanapat, the Senior Justice System Coordinator for ASEAN-ACT. It has been an opening session for us all, and I can tell in terms of the question that's coming into our chat box. So especially for those that working in the field that helping victims of the trafficking in access to justice. So without further ado, first of all, I would like to pick some of the questions. And maybe the first one that I would like to raise is from one of our audiences from Sri Lanka. And maybe I might ask Sandeep to answer to this question first. This question is around whether the Anti-Slavery Australia coordinate with the foreign governments or foreign CSO, NGO at all in case that the victims are from the overseas. Or is there any example international collaboration to assist the victim that from overseas, if you can share with us? Thank you.
Sure. So the example that really strikes me from our work where we do rely really heavily on international cooperation is in repatriation matters. So often we are contacted by individuals who might be exit trafficked from Australia for a number of reasons. So for example, they might be exit trafficked by an intimate spouse or family member. And often we see young people as well in the Australian context exit trafficked for the purposes of forced marriage, which is also considered a slavery-like offence in Australia. And in those circumstances, when we're working to repatriate someone, we're working closely with the Australian government, in particular DFAT, and with the Australian Federal Police, if the person consents. But of course, if someone is on the ground in a foreign country, on the ground support is absolutely crucial. So in those circumstances, we're also locating relevant NGOs, depending on where that person is located and the operational presence of any NGOs there, to try and also provide them with on the ground support. And I think that really illustrates the need for cross-country collaboration in these kinds of matters, because they are so complex and they're spanning across a range of borders.
Thank you so much. Of course, because the human trafficking may be from the perspective of others, people might think that it's only cross-border, but of course, domestic is also one of the the place where human trafficking could happen as well. And so this maybe just go a little deeper into the question from our audience from Sri Lanka. Has there been any collaboration with the authority or organization in Sri Lanka before, to your experience, Sandeep?
We have received contact from victim survivors in Sri Lanka, and we have provided advice. So an example that comes to mind is someone that was in Australia in an exploitative situation and decided to return to Sri Lanka. She decided she no longer wanted to remain in Australia, which is something we see people decide to return to their home countries. And in that case, we were able to provide her with information around avenues for compensation under Australian state schemes. So that's probably the most striking example that comes to mind in terms of Sri Lanka.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Maybe I will have to go to the next question, and this one will be for the CDF Vida. Are you able to share with us about the effort to bring the perpetrator of this trafficker or the trafficking, like the employers in Syria, into justice, either through a formal channel like a mutual legal assistance or the joint operations with the local authorities? Any coordination from the embassy to the local NGO or CSO as well in try to help assisting the victims?
Thank you so much, Shanapat, and I'm very happy to share that after 5 years of litigation, the Philippine Embassy in Syria worked with the local law enforcement authorities and the local justice system to win the first ever human trafficking conviction of a Syrian employer, a Syrian recruitment agency, and working with the Philippine illegal recruiters and human traffickers. So we got the highest ever judgment award given to a foreign worker. And this one was something that was initiated by the former embassy staff, but we pushed and pushed together with our Syrian retainer lawyer and the Syrian judge to issue a judgment that would be in favor of the foreign worker. So this one, even if we don't have a formal mutual legal assistance treaty yet or an MLAT with the Syrian government, now we're in the process of negotiating a memorandum of understanding on trafficking in persons. And instead, what we do is actually do a lot of diplomatic negotiations with them to engage our counterparts. So the nice thing as well is we're able to coordinate with CSOs or NGOs. So in the Philippines, during that time, we worked with the Blas Ople Policy Center, and now, of course, our new minister or secretary for Department of Migrant Workers was the head of the Blas Ople Policy Center. But in terms of the Syrian CSOs and NGOs, it is quite challenging because of the language barrier, since our citizens speak Filipino and the main lingua franca here is Arabic language. So we rely a lot on our interpreters to bridge that gap. And we also work as well with Syrian government, because under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, we have to coordinate with the local law enforcement. We cannot directly go to the house of the survivor and get her and extract her from the house. So we need the help of the local law enforcement authorities through formal diplomatic channels. So yes, this is a very important aspect that needs to be clarified, and eventually, inshallah, as they say, we will be able to have an MLAT when the time comes. Thank you.
Hope that would lead to something important or tangible as such a formal cooperation. And if I may ask further on top of this question, with the Syrian model that you have, I would say, started, are you aware that this model has been implemented elsewhere in other Philippines missions or diplomatic missions or embassies elsewhere in the world?
Well, so far we shared the experience with our consulate in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and we also shared it with our colleagues in Tehran in Iran. So of course, it depends on the ambassador or the consul general on the level of implementation that they would do, since usually it's the head of post or the head of mission who decides the level of involvement in this sort of Syria model. But I would say the important part is really the openness of government officials to exploring more creative, out-of-the-box ways of handling the issue. Because if you just rely on referral systems, we know how overloaded the justice system is locally. So if you also work on it while you're still abroad, while you're still inside the shelter offshore, then it's also a big way to begin the justice process by providing the victim the legal assistance that she needs, even while she's in the custody of government authorities. And that's something that I hope embassies will consider. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your answer. And I hope that we might see, well, might not see more of the user model, but of course, it would not be good to have see more of this because they're more victim, but that's what we want, but more offering of the assistant. That would be what we would like to see more. And if I may go to the next question from one of the audiences from Thailand, and this one I might call upon Kong Sang to give opinions. If Ms. Kong Sang could give us some opinion about in which way, from the perspective of the CSO, that the authorities should improve or should be improved to strengthen ASEAN-wide protection and referral mechanism among ASEAN member states.
Can you repeat your question again? My internet is like a drop and down.
Sure, no worries.
Sorry.
So, in which way do you think, from the perspective of the CSO or NGO, that the authorities should be improved to strengthen ASEAN-wide protection and referral mechanism for the victims of trafficking?
Thank you for the question. So as the CSO perspective, and also from the experiences that we found working with the government and also CSO, we would suggest that the first improvement is the coordination channel. So now we are in 5G. We are not like in the back, at the back. So in order to helping the emergency helping, for example, the victim of human trafficking, now they are in the trafficking or in the workplace. So how to help them quickly out of the workplace? That should be the informal channel, and using the application, the internet, that they can be communicate faster and helping. And secondly is the embassy. Embassy and consular should be involved more in the government body for protection of the human trafficking. Because in many countries, we see only the police or the justice that are involved in the helping the police, but we not very much seeing the embassy are having the capacity building or realize on what's their key main role to help the victim when they are exported in the destination country. I think that as we see many countries in others other country that the embassy is the key main role to helping the victim of human trafficking. So in terms of the mechanism for the ASEAN's wide, I think that as the ASEAN's level, they have many bodies like Asia, ACWC, the task force. So I think that the embassy should be involved and be part of the committee or the working body on helping the victim of human trafficking. Not only the police from the origins country or the police in the destination country, but involve the embassy into the mechanism to helping and set up the referral system. That's shorten, make it shorten, not long process. That's what I can suggest.
Thank you. That's excellent. And actually, I do also think that this also reflect from one of our poll question. The answer is that in order to develop the system is more tangible, it is important that there is a strengthened collaboration among victim assistance agency, and that could be not just only among the government agency, that should be also cross-government agency and also even among the CSO and NGO as well. And if I may go to the next question, we got the question from Yolanda, and I will read this out first. I believe this can be directed to all of the speakers. So are there any proactive measure put in place to monitor regularly the people or employees as soon as they reach their destination to prevent them from becoming victim? And I think probably this one might be more relevant to CDA Vida. If you would like to share with us, is there any, instead of we helping them after they have fall victim or fall prey to trafficking, what about the prevention or preventative measure for that? Is there any effort on that at the moment that you're aware of?
Thank you so much to Yolanda and of course Shanapat for raising that question. So for those who enter Syria illegally, of course, it is very, very difficult to trace their location. So normally we receive the request for assistance either through informal networks like Facebook Messenger, or they will call our Assistance to Nationals hotline, the mobile number of the embassy, or sometimes the Filipino community organizations themselves. So it's very important that we receive reports from the networks of the other citizens who know about the specific situations. So right now, because there's a deployment ban in Syria, so they don't really go through the formal like pre-departure orientation seminar or the post-arrival orientation seminars. There's nothing like that currently in place here. But as soon as they arrive within the custody of the embassy, then that's when we begin the orientation and we capacitate them on the anti-trafficking advocacy that we have. So far, Alhamdulillah, we are working with the Syrian government authorities, and they themselves are notifying us about reports that they receive. And in the same way, we also coordinate with them by writing our diplomatic notes and refer cases to look for people to be extracted from the specific locations where they are being exploited. So that's how it's done so far.
Thank you so much. And yes, of course, apart from helping the victim after the fall, maybe we have to look on the other side of our effort to prevent and suppress the human trafficking from the first stage of for them becoming the victim as well. If I may go to the next question, and I would like to direct this one to Sandeep, if I may. This is the question from Nicolette. And the question is, when we're talking about justice, how much is that driven by the legal or state definition versus the personal individual needs? Are there therapeutic jurisprudence options utilized if survivors determine that criminal justice is not something they wish to engage in? So for example, a version of innovative justice that you can share from your experience with the ASA?
Yeah, I think I'll address the first part of that question, which is access to justice. And I think that means something different for everybody. And I can speak to my own role as a lawyer here. And I really see my role as working with people to identify their goals and what justice they are seeking. And I think that will be that would differ depending on someone's particular circumstances. So sometimes that might mean engaging in the criminal justice system and bringing accountability to perpetrators. But many times people don't wish to go down that pathway for a number of reasons. And that could be because they find that process re-traumatizing, or they fear harm to themselves or their families, or they simply wish to move forward without engaging in that process. And in those circumstances, we would still look at what other legal remedies are available to them. So other avenues for justice. So for example, through compensation, in forced labor type matters, we would be looking at making claims for unpaid wages. In forced marriage type matters, it might look like obtaining divorces or violence protection orders. So I think in that sense, what justice looks like will really depend on the unique circumstances of the victim survivor. And I think in terms of the second part of that question, it is a really important point that you make, Nicolette. And I think in the Australian landscape, trafficking and slavery, it's only pursued by the authorities through the criminal justice system at the moment. And the specific support system is contingent upon participation in this process. And that's something that I touched upon. And I think the point that you're making is also something that we advocate for, which is that this approach must be broadened. And we need to encourage the government to consider alternative approaches which better centre the needs for victim survivors, in particular for victim survivors to be able to engage in a criminal justice process which is less re-traumatizing for them, and one which better centres their needs as well.
Thank you so much. And I think that's has been reflecting from your presentation as well, that the service that ASA is providing is based on the self-determination of the victim, that is not conditional to whether they would like to pursue this in the legal justice process or not. This is how we actually focusing on what the victim actually want and how they would like to proceed from their point of view. Well, actually, there is also another part of the question from Nicolette as well. If I may elaborate further on the question from Nicolette, are there any therapeutic jurisprudence options? I beg your pardon. So what is there any treatment solution that are being offered to survivor at all? And how do you think the service provider working to navigate the trauma in their personal life to support them in pursuing the option after the process of being the victim? Are you able to share the practice that ASA is doing with the victim?
Well, I think that comes down to the point around holistic support. So although we as a legal service provider cannot provide those services to people, we understand the importance of linking people with holistic support. And I think Ms. Kongsang also touched upon that need for stable accommodation, for other therapeutic support, for mental health support. And we also recognise that for somebody to be in a position to be able to engage in the legal process or to receive legal advice, it's so important that they have those other supports in place. And so, yes, that is a core part of our work. It is making those referrals for those other forms of support as well.
And if I may ask Consent the same question, can you share with us as well the practice of the VFI on any therapeutic options for the survivors to go and live about with their life? Is there any particular model that you would like to share with us?
again, as I in my presentation, and the work that we are doing right now, of course, that we also trying our best to helping the victim of human trafficking to access to justice, and but we also know that many victims don't want to engage in the justice, as Sandy mentioned, because of many reasons, and also it's a long process. They don't want to be interview again. They want to be involved. They just want to be freedom. They want to be with somebody that they like, they love, like they want to stay with their family, want to be with their friend. They already happy to be out of the place that exploit them. So our option we do, as in my presentation, we provide them, of course, a safe shelter, mental health support, healthcare support, and also life skill is really important. Again, I would say that to empowering them, and also during we provide the life skill and empowering to the victim of human trafficking. We also explain again what's the important to engage in the justice. But again, we are very respect to their decision not to engage in the justice, so that we have the educational, vocational training, job placement, the other job option for them, and also for their family. We also have a person who has mental health care, so that, and she cannot do anything, but after it takes long time for her to recover, but their family also very poor. She's happy to stay with the family, so we support the family with increase the income, and also provide the counseling not only to the victim but also to the family, to their parent or to the sister. We also support for the economic empowerment, so that they can have a sustained income and support themselves and feeling to be happy staying in the community. So that's what the holistic services that we provide to the victim of human trafficking, though they don't want to engage in the justice.
Thank you so much. And I think I saw the hand from CDF Vita. We would like to jump in to add on this as well. Please welcome.
Yes, thank you, Chanapat. And just to add to what Sandeep and Kong Seng mentioned in their extensive sharing, that for some embassies that do have a big shelter, there is a labor attaché and a social welfare attaché able to provide the same mental health resources. But here in Syria, since we don't have other attachés, so it's really the organic personnel. That's why kudos to the assistant to nationals officers who are themselves providing the art therapy support, the getting the counselors from Syria and translating from Arabic to English to Filipino, so that the citizens here inside the shelter can also benefit from that. But at the end of the day, the emphasis is always respecting the choice of the survivor, like giving dignity to the victim, and knowing that this person's choice must prevail, that even if we would propose options for this person, at the end of the day, we respect their individuality and what they want to do with their lives, and what kind of assistance can we possibly provide to them in the best way possible. So thank you for this.
Thank you so much. And I think I have time for one last question. And maybe I want to direct this first to Sandeep. Are you aware of any compensation process for the victim, maybe in Australia or maybe within the ASEAN? For example, if the victim is willing to be repatriated back to their home country and the court processing is still continue at the destination countries, are you aware of how is this progress for the victim?
So I can speak to the compensation schemes in Australia generally, and in Australia, there are state schemes in each state and territory that are set up to compensate victims of crime. So unfortunately, these schemes are not specific to modern slavery and trafficking. They are set up to compensate victims of crime for acts of violence that have occurred. And because trafficking and slavery we see more often than not, it does involve violence and abuse. We're able to make applications under these state schemes for victims of trafficking and slavery. And that's even if a person has decided to return to their home country. if an act of violence occurred within that jurisdiction in Australia, we are able to make an application on their behalf. But like I've said, these schemes are not specific to modern slavery, and we do think that's a gap in the Australian framework. So we do advocate for a national compensation scheme to be provided, to provide that specific support to victims and survivors. And we think that's a really crucial part of a person's recovery, is being able to access funds, because we know that recovery can take an incredibly long time.
Definitely, and yes, compensation is another issue that we should be focusing on when trying to redress the issue for the victim of the human trafficking. So time is of the essence, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity for the question from all the participants. And now it's time to hand the floor back to you, Attorney Darlene. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pom, and of course to all our participants for actively asking those questions and sharing as well. And of course, thank you to our panelists for generously sharing your response to the questions. But before I'll briefly ask you any takeaways for our participants, I would just like to share just one case to the question of Daden Rat on the compensation process, where the victim is already in her home country and the court proceeding is still continuing in another country. We have a very good example in the Philippines, where the Filipina was called in the French embassy to give her testimony on the compensation via a video conferencing hearing, where the French embassy put in this video conferencing trial happening in France, and the victim in the Philippines testified in the French embassy on that compensation. And because of that, the court in France was able to award compensation for the victims, even though the victim was already in the Philippines. So I just a little bit sharing on that successful case hearing on compensation. But then again, thank you so much, everyone. So before we let our panelists go, we would just like to request our panelists to give us one last thought. And given all the poll results, the videos that we've watched, the presentations that we've heard from each of our panelists, we would just like to ask the panelists to ponder on one main question, given the title of our topic and our discussion: what we can do to actually minimize or ease the difficulties that victims encounter in accessing justice and seeking redress. So I'd like to start with Sandeep, followed by CDA Vida, and then Ms. Kong Seng.
Thank you, Darlene. I think, like we've all touched upon today, I think that support should always center the survivor. I know that we keep saying it, but we really need to listen to people and to be guided by people. And I think as well, we can see in the modern slavery movement that at the moment it's not survivor-led, and it's really important to engage with survivors, to take their feedback on, to build on that knowledge, so we can further improve our services to better cater for the needs of survivors as well, and take account of all of those vulnerabilities so that we can provide them with that holistic service. But on a personal level as well, I would just like to say it's been so heartening hearing from both Vida and Kong Seng as well, and hearing about the collaboration that can happen between agencies internationally. I think it's really incredible, and I think it just shows that we can achieve so much by collaborating together and really learn a lot from each other as well. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. I agree. You always emphasize it. Collaboration is key. And another big C is compensation for the victims to help them recover. So thank you, Sandeep. And CDA Vida, please.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Well, like the story of Lara, it's important for us to hold space for them, to really listen to the survivors, for us to be conscious and mindful about telling their stories with respect and dignity, to be the kind of officials who are willing to partner with different organizations like Sandeep and Kong Seng's groups and the others that are existing right now, that we will be able to engage the survivors on a level of seeing them not just as numbers to look at, but as individuals, as human beings, who we can demonstrate the value of loving them back to life, that we are there, we are present as government officials to also provide hope and healing. Because at the end of the day, we are all created equal in the eyes of God. And it is that same dignity in the creation of human beings that we should remind them that they are precious in the eyes of our Creator. So thank you everyone for this.
Thank you, CDA Vida. As what we've also been emphasizing, victim-centered approach is also key, as also mentioned by Sandeep. Thank you so much, CDA Vida. So Ms. Kong Seng, please.
Thank you, Darlene. So I also learned a lot from Sandy and also Vida. We are in the same page that we are looking at the victim center and also helping them to access to justice. But I think that all of us need to also clearly understand the victim center. Sometimes the best benefit for the victim is not the best benefit that what they think, but is the best benefit they may be from access pursued to them, but they may not want to that. So access to justice, as we just talking earlier about, they don't want to engage in the justice. So we have to also have the best option for them, the holistic services that provide to them so that they can survive and recovery, staying happily with the family. That would be, I think that's beyond just the justice, but also the other life session for them to have other kind of services to be living, have a good life in their family. The compensation is really important for all the victims and what they are looking for to receive the compensation. Many times that the victim involved in the justice, but that at the end, the justice is not finished and received what they have been waiting for. And it ends up that they feel sorrow about what the things that happening, because once they involved in the justice, they have to be interviewed, they have to be in the video conference, they have to be involved meeting many people that they may not want to talking about with. Something this is just to leave us when we work in the victim. I would say that victim center is something that we need to really put in place, understanding and raise awareness, including access to justice, have to really care and keen on the victim-centered approach. So thank you very much for the ASEAN-ACT and thank you for the participants. So everyone that give me a chance to share and also learn from others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kong Seng, again on the emphasis on victim-centered approach and the value of getting their informed consent before we actually fully engage with them, or whether or not they would want to engage in the justice system. So thank you so much for all your messages, insights, and last thoughts. We really appreciate it very much. So now I would like to invite our team leader, Dr. Lucia Pauli, to give us a brief summary and of course her closing remarks. Dr. Lucia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you're dialing in from. I have the great pleasure of closing this really relevant and tangible webinar discussion today on victim protection and support. And it's a topic that is core to the implementation of a human rights-based approach to trafficking in persons. And it's, of course, core to the implementation of the ASEAN Convention against trafficking in persons. I was reflecting that human rights and specifically victim survivors' rights can feel a bit abstract to those of us who work at the policy and strategy level. We sit in a lot of meetings, we often talk about our legal obligations, but these are really just words on a page if they're not actually internalized and implemented effectively. It's often really easy to forget that trafficking cases at their core are cases involving vulnerable victims and their families. They're cases often involving vulnerable perpetrators as well. And these are human beings who come from the most marginalised communities in our societies. So this webinar has really highlighted to us the complex needs that victims and survivors have. They're very individualised and unique needs, but also their ability to exercise agency and participate actively in a justice process that can bring perpetrators to justice and that can also shape the victims' own futures. I'd like to thank all of our expert panelists today for some really thought-provoking presentations and for the multimedia that you used to communicate the message, including the excellent videos. To Sandeep Dillon from Anti-Slavery Australia, I think your key message was so important that pretty much all victims and survivors of trafficking and slavery have complex legal needs and they do have a right to legal assistance. Legal assistance is not the same as seeing a social worker, not the same as being given a spot in a shelter or a rooming house. Legal assistance is a specialised service that has to be provided by suitably trained professionals. You mentioned so many good practices that are directly aligned with the ACT and directly aligned with our obligations under the Palermo Protocol as well, and really emphasise how they can be delivered in practice. Some of the good practices that you emphasised were providing migration assistance, because most migrants and victim survivors have very difficult and complicated migration journeys, and they need support to navigate these complex systems. You talked about family reunification and repatriation, but if and only if that's what the victim survivors want. You talked about the importance of looking at whether violence is present, the importance of restraining orders, and also using compensation schemes creatively. If you don't have a compensation scheme in your country that supports victims of trafficking, see how you can use other schemes creatively to support victims. You talked about links into the criminal justice system, but only if informed consent is provided. And you talked about the fact that victims should be provided with support regardless of whether they want to go forward with a criminal justice case or not. And finally, and really importantly, you talked about that importance of flexible and adaptive support for victims as they move through their journey of reintegration and recovery. To Chargé d'Affaires in Damascus, CD Vida, what was so amazing about the work that you've done to support victims in Syria is that you're able to navigate and support people living in a foreign country. And this is one of the most challenging aspects of identifying and supporting victims. It's one thing if you're in your home country and you understand the laws and the policies and the processes and you're connected and you've got access to the people you need to have access to. But when people are identified outside their home countries, and they usually are when they're victim survivors of trafficking, they need additional assistance. They're in countries where they don't speak the language, they have no support and no connections. So you really highlighted to us that diplomatic missions are crucial in the fight against trafficking. You're often the first responders in trafficking cases, as victim survivors will of course naturally approach their embassies and consulates for help. You also have access to senior decision makers and policies in the systems and the countries that you're working with, and you understand the foreign context in which you're working. So you have such a strong role to influence in the repatriation and return process, in providing legal assistance, in applying the non-punishment principle for victims of trafficking. And it was really encouraging to hear that you haven't just supported victims to return home, you've also supported them to go through a criminal justice process that's resulted in a criminal conviction of a Syrian trafficker or an employer engaged in exploitation. You also provided some brilliant examples of whole of government coordination, both formally and informal, including the importance of using informal channels and personal relationships through WhatsApp and other platforms as well. And to Kong Sen from our partner Village Focus International, You made the very important point that initial reports of suspected victims of trafficking can come from many different sources. They can come from victims, from their families, from a government official, from a bystander. And it's really important that this information is triangulated and analysed and collected by an organisation like VFI that works to connect the dots and ask the right questions to build a picture of what exactly has happened to this individual. You can't establish a support service or a care plan until you actually know what's happened to that victim. Of course, you emphasise that the complex needs of the victim include health needs, mental health needs, access to legal advice, access to shelter. And you had a really brilliant quote, which was, whatever they need and whatever they like. And I think that second part of the quote is so often forgotten. We tend to see victims as victims that need to receive services and that they're passive in this process. But what's really important is, just like us that access services, health services, mental health services, legal services, we have choices, we have preferences, we like some things, we don't like other things. And that actually giving victims choice and agency contributes so much to their overall experience and prospects for recovery. And finally, the very important message that compensation, of course, is an entire process, and that an order from a judge means nothing if it can't be reinforced. So a support person needs to stay with a victim to follow them through the whole process, not just to the final day of the trial, but to actually help the individual access the compensation and ensure that it's paid. I think in the discussion that followed, the key message that was really important for me was cooperation, both within countries and between countries, both formal and informal. It's never easy to cooperate, especially across jurisdictions, but it's not impossible. And we've heard today that it's actually possible in a number of contexts between Thailand and Laos, that are of course neighbouring countries, but also between countries as far apart as Syria and the Philippines, or Sri Lanka and Australia. And we heard the importance of having the right people on the ground in both countries, including good interpreters. We heard that when cooperation happens, it's much more likely to produce better results for the victim and better convictions in terms of criminal justice. So let us end with that clear message from our panelists. Cooperation is key to victim protection and support. It's currently not the norm, but it could be. Today, we've heard some very practical and tangible examples of how victims have been protected and supported to access justice and navigate the complex process of returning and reintegrating back into their home countries, or how they can be supported to start new lives in another location, free from harm and from exploitation. Please allow me again to thank all of our experts today, as well as our facilitators, Darlene and Pom. Thank you for joining us and for your fantastic questions to all of you, which really brought out such a rich discussion today. We look forward to seeing you all at our final webinar for 2022 on the 2nd of December, which will commemorate International Day of People with Disabilities, where we'll focus on the underexplored but important nexus between disability and trafficking in persons. We look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lucia, for excellently capturing the highlights of today's discussion and for closing the webinar with much positivity, as we certainly need that to moving forward in these complex issues. So on behalf of ASEAN-ACT, please accept our warmest appreciation. It has been an honor and pleasure to have you, Sandeep Dillon, CDA Vida, Soraya Versosa, Kong Seng, Piang Panya, and of course, Carla Hiranek, and then of course, ending this discussion this week with such an interesting discussion. So we also hope that our participants have gained a lot of insights from this webinar. And as Dr. Lucia had mentioned, we hope to see you again on December 2 for our last webinar of the year. So just again, a reminder to all our audience, we love to hear your thoughts. So kind reminder, please fill up the one-page feedback survey. The link is shared in the chat box. Your certificate of attendance will be sent to your email address that you will provide in the survey. So we will be posting that again in the chat box for your easy access to it. And then you can see that there is also a link where you would be able to review the Zoom webinar recording that will be uploaded in our portal, and you can also access the materials. So thank you again. Please be safe, everyone, and stay well. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maraming salamat. Shukran jazilan. Terima kasih. Thank you, ASEAN-ACT. Thank you to the PNP and DOJ, law enforcement dito, DOJ prosecutors. Thank you very much.